Welcome to Identicast. This is the first episode of the new interview series covering everything identity security. Today, we have Rajiv Srinivasan, a more than 10-year veteran of the cybersecurity space whose background includes stops at MobileIron and VMware, among other organizations, and who today serves as a VP of Revenue for BlueFlag, an emerging player in the SDLC security space. Rajiv, nice to meet you.
Hey, likewise. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So Rajiv, tell us a little about BlueFlag.
Sure. So BlueFlag Security is the world's leading provider of SDLC security and governance services. We're a platform, a unified platform to secure everything from code, CI/CD, repository access. And our big value proposition is we're doing it from an identity-centric perspective. And that's something that we haven't really seen very much in the general DevSecOps landscape as a true identity-centric tool for securing the SDLC.
That's great. So let's jump right into it. SDLC governance. Why is that important for a lot of customers out there? And why the tie-in to identity?
Sure. So SDLC is the software development life cycle. It's how we build products. It's the coding, it's the committing, it's the integration tools, and then of course the reviews, the edits, and then the developments of future products and the integration into the old. So the entire process by which we build code is actually very different than the tools we use to secure code. So for example, your listeners might be familiar of application security posture management or cloud security posture management. Like that's very important in a very mature market that we've seen evolve over the past, 5 years, 10 years of cloud migration. But yet what we're finding now in the market is that it is the process that we build the code, which is the newest attack surface that the modern nefarious actor is looking to exploit. And the reason why is just as we just discussed, right? Like the past 5 to 10 years, we've been working on securing the actual applications in, its cloud environment. That part is really well done. I mean, and honestly, hats off to the past 10 years of cybersecurity experts and product developers. Like, think about, something I like to talk about is like that migration. Think about the migration from like mainframe to an on-premise data center, and then the migration from the data center to the cloud. Relatively speaking, right, that migration to the cloud happened like that. And we could not have done it without the brilliant expertise of the people who worked on cloud security. But now the attack surface to secure is the SDLC, right? We're talking code repositories, CI/CD infrastructure, runtime environments, artifact repositories. What we've seen is that in the push to build and develop product and get it out there, right? Because like all of us who are involved in building software, like, man, those VPs of engineering, they have got a target on their back. Like, I need product, I need it now, I need the feature, I need it now. And in that kind of culture, what happened is that the DevOps ecosystem, generally speaking, became very over-permissioned, right? If you have a developer on leave and they're on a vital product, what are you going to do? You're going to give access to that repository to another developer and say, hey, step in. We got to get this job done, right? So in the interests of speed and productivity, a lot of these like permissions and posturing of the SDLC infrastructure just got a little too lax. And what we've seen now is a combination of both single and multi-pronged attacks where the SDLC is the backdoor of entry to access to valuable information. So for example, I'm sure we'll talk about several breaches today on this podcast, but one that happened relatively recently, about a month ago, was the New York Times had a really significant breach where a GitHub token was leaked as in a secret leak, right? As a README file that was accessed, and then actually that token in the code repository was super over permissioned, right? So you had a secret leak of a token followed by that token's over permissioned nature inside the source code repository, which gave that nefarious actor access to everything. It was like a really bad day for the New York Times. We see this happen a lot now with like phishing attempts. For example, there's a nefarious actor group that's actually posing as like employees from GitHub, either as recruiters, customer success people, lawyers even, saying, hey, we need to verify XYZ. Just go ahead and log in with your GitHub credentials. And oh, by the way, it's a random OAuth pathway. So they're just the poor developers who think they might be applying for a job at GitHub are handing over their GitHub credentials and giving over the keys to the castle. And because their employers have over permissioned them, it's like, they get access to everything. And so the question for us now is, how do we, at an identity level, secure the SDLC? Because thus far, what most of our customers and everyone is focusing on has been code scanning. Let's just scan the packages and see if they're package vulnerabilities. But I tell you what, Nabil, that is like 10 to 15% of the problem. There's a whole identity-centric problem that we got to go solve.
So let's double click on that. This is really helpful. So from an identity perspective, and we've been talking about it as well, right? But to all our customers and listeners, the identity problem is kind of backed into cloud identity security, or more affectionately known as the KIM space, right? Cloud infrastructure entitlements management. But I also feel that there's a gap between what KIM does today and the need to manage the tokens and permissions down at the DevOps tools. Can you just expand a little bit for our audience on why KIM isn't enough, and that they've got to look at a KIM plus
sure.
with the identity permission problem?
Funny enough, the founders of our company, BlueFlag, were also the founders of Cloud Knox, which was a big KIM provider that got acquired by Microsoft. And, so here's an interesting point of trivia, or an interesting fact. Like, in the vast majority of companies, developers have zero access to their actual cloud infrastructure, right? There are so many gateways and, integration and code review tools between their code and the actual cloud infrastructure. So KIM is really important for securing cloud infrastructure and where the application rests, but it has zero to do with how the code is built and where it's built and how it's reviewed. It's, like I said, the runtime environments, artifact repositories, etc. Now, what's interesting is a lot of CISOs we talk to, and I'm sure you've heard this too, right? Like, we're just sitting here twiddling our thumbs and we're just waiting for that, the KIM players, or the, ASPM players, the CSPM players. We're just waiting for them to shift left, right? Like, oh, these guys will come down to DevOps world sometime, right?
Yes.
It hasn't happened.
Yes.
And what's crazy is let's be brutally honest, right? Like, all for whether it's Jenkins, JFrog, GitHub, GitLab, whatever you're using to build software, the APIs are open, right? Why is this such a hard problem to solve? Like, why couldn't they just shift left? This feels so easy. Well, it turns out, Nabil, that the act of building software versus hosting it are two very different core competencies. And it actually requires, and we're seeing this now, it requires a separate market of products to secure the SDLC than it did to secure cloud infrastructure, right? Because when you're talking about SDLC, the complexity is crazy. Let's just, I'm going to give you a layman term example, right? Name between the two of us, we could probably name 6 cloud infrastructure providers and have it all wrapped up, right? Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Alibaba, Oracle, right? We're done. When it comes to SDLC, there is right. There's no clear winner in any major category except for code repositories, which is GitHub and maybe CI/CD, which is one could argue it's Jenkins, right? Like, you can make an argument in any direction that it's not.
But a developer is going to use what they're comfortable with as well. I mean, we're starting to see Azure DevOps become more mainstream now as well, right? I mean, and look, I've always been fascinated by this. We have a few customers that, in their mind, as long as it's tied to an identity management system and XYZ user is no longer with the company and they deprovision their access, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything else is secure and copacetic, right? There's got to be code running in a GitHub repo that can still talk to their cloud provider platform
Well,
and cause issues.
You hit it on the head. And let's even put it this way, there's a tendency to say that, it's an identity-centric product, so I'm going to send it to the IAM team, like the people who own Okta or the Ping Identities of the world. But here's the problem, right? We're not talking about access to the code repository. Like, fine, use Okta to gain access to the code repository. But once you're in, do you want that identity to have read access, to have write access, maintainer access, or admin access, right? What we like to do is actually go in and see, hey, in the past 90 days, this developer who has been assigned admin access across all the repos has only used read access across 80% of them. They only need 10% of these 10% of the repos, they need read-only access, maybe maintainer on another 10%. Like, why are they so overprivileged? That means that's a huge attack surface, right? So this is not just about identity as a function of access. It's about permissions. What can they actually do within the code repository?
But they're developers. They just want all types of access.
They want it. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, this is great. So I want to go back to a point you made earlier about code scanning as well, right? I mean, there's obviously tools like Black Duck or Snake for code scanning. Or even configuration tools within GitHub. Shouldn't that be enough? I mean, why aren't those sufficient?
Yeah, and actually this week we were really proud to announce we actually just became Sneak's a Sneak partner for SDLC Governance and Security. So we have a deep integration with Sneak in particular, and really proud of that. And I think what we see in Sneak is they're a really world-class tool for package analysis in particular. That's primarily where our integration starts. They also have, really great tools for, IAC Terraform vulnerability scanning and SAST scanning. But the problem with code scanning is a limitation, particularly with any of these mainstream tools, is first and foremost, it's a problem of accountability, right? Like, it's not enough in our belief, to just know what the issue is. We want to know the date, time, and identity of the person or service account who brought the package into the system in the first place. Same with secret leakage within the packages, right? Or within the code.
Right.
Like, we want to, and this is really the heart of it, Nabil, is we're not just solving a problem when we come to the table with an identity-centric approach. We're building a culture, right? This is everybody's responsibility. And if we can look at bad behavior, negligent behavior, over-permissioned teams, etc., and we can actually assign accountability to team leaders, to individual developers, and say, hey, this is not best practices. We're here to help you become better, help the entire organization become better. Like, that's how we start building a culture of SDLC security that makes every application and, of course, our customers safer, right? And so that's why the importance of identity. Look, there are plenty of SDLC tools and ways in which we can solve this problem. But if we're going to actually change culture, then it's got to be an identity-centric approach.
It's interesting, and I want to double click on that, right? I mean, it has to become a cultural shift in order to solve this problem. And typically, the DevOps world, and a phrase that I've used for many years, is they move at the speed of business, right? They don't want all these security tools in place. As you mentioned earlier, it's infrastructure as code at the end of the day, where they develop their code, the processes they go through. They want to just move at that speed. So how do you solve this?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you're allowing me to answer this, because this is what you're saying. There's forgive me, but there's this assumption that security and speed are inherently adversarial. Meaning that if you bring in
you got to find the right balance, right?
I see. That's even, in my opinion, in our opinion, that's not even the right way to think about it, right? Our mission is not just to be zero friction for the engineers. We believe that our tool makes, and we don't just believe it, we see it in our customers. We're helping engineers move faster, right? We're moving faster because we're using AI to automate a lot of the changes and configurations that are already available to us manually. This is why this is a problem. is like, for example, let's take a very simple example, permissioning in a code repository. Right now, when we talk to our largest customers, the way and I'm sure your listeners will resonate with this, right? They'll have bureaucratic like access meetings where at the beginning of the quarter is like, okay, who's working on which project? Who needs access to which repo environment? Okay, great. Approved. We'll go do it, this process. And then a week later, a handful of accesses are issued. And then the next quarter, 3 months later, they'll say, do they still need access? No. Okay. A week later, we'll revoke it, right? That's mind-numbingly inefficient and slow. And so what we did is we're using AI and tools to say, hey, this is, let's like take that example a step further. So just as a baseline day-to-day, what you need to do your job, we're looking at the past 90 days. We're looking at the code repository's metadata. And if the developer has used a maintainer level of access in the past 90 days, great, they get to keep it. But if they've been issued admin access and are only using write access, well then, hey, let's make the new standard. This person has write access to this repository on an ongoing basis. Now the part two, which is, hey, I'm a developer or I'm a VP of engineering. I need my people to move fast. They're overprivileged for a reason. Where I said, you're right. You need to make them move fast. So instead of waiting a week at a time or wait to that quarterly code review to get it, what if we introduced just-in-time permissioning for the code repository?
I was just going to say it's JIT-based permissioning
exactly.
for the code repos.
And it's crazy, right? JIT-based permissioning existed in cloud infrastructure like years ago. Am I not right?
Yeah.
And so we decided.
So I have.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah. So we decided, well, listen, if a developer needs access, and right now we've designed it primarily through like Slack, we don't necessarily want people to have to leave their source of truth. So like, let's say I'm just in this example, let's say you're in Slack. I need to request maintainer access to this repository for 3 weeks. When I hit submit, when it goes to the owner, the repository owner Slack channel, and they're approving the grant instantaneously, guess what else they're approving instantaneously? The expiration of access. So immediately when I'm done with this one-off project, the access is automatically revoked. Think about how much faster that is to move than these like bureaucratic meetings. So Nabil, my point here to conclude is like security and speed actually work hand in hand. If we do things in a really regimented, automated, secure fashion, dev teams can move faster than ever.
It's actually refreshing to hear because even in the identity and access management world, the last thing end users want is another UI to go request access. And I've always said you shouldn't be requesting access for things you need to have in the first place. It should always be exception-based. So the fact that you can help them move faster in an exception-based request and have that integrated with a tool like Slack or Teams channels and chat is the way to go as well. So let me just play devil's advocate and ask a question. Why wouldn't this just be something that's available in an ASPM or even a cloud provider? I mean, I think I know the answer, right? Too many DevOps tools and the multi-cloud platforms that everyone has, but I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, man. Look, at the end of the day, like let's get real here. Like if the cloud providers, the ASPMs and CSPMs wanted to shift left, I think they would have done so because the market opportunity is real, right? There's a lot of risk in this problem. There's a lot of money being thrown at it. The startups that have entered this space of SDLC specific security and governance, like they've all raised like massive rounds. And we do see a handful of ASPM players and CSPM players moving left with like certain features and certain functionalities. But you're right. The shift left has not been as aggressive as I think a lot of CISOs were hoping. And I think many are still waiting for their CSPM or ASPM to shift left in a big, meaningful way. The problem is, like I said before, it is literally about core competency, right? Like protecting and hosting an application at rest, if you will, is very different than protecting the vast variety of cultural and product nuances required in building that same application. It's two very different functions. And to the layman, to people on the outside of technology, people who live, outside the Silicon Valley bubble, like when they hear, engineer, I was like, oh, cool. That person clicks on keyboard all day, right? Like they're, the cloud, right? That's where everything is. It's just in the cloud. It's very generic, right? And the thing is, as we get closer and closer and closer to the profession and the industry of software, we see the nuances. And I think those of us who are really near this split between like DevOps and cloud infrastructure, like we see the nuances, and they're not, they might be small to the average observer, but to those of us like really close to the problem, these are massive rifts that dramatically affect the performance of both the security tool and the day-to-day life of the engineers and personnel required to maintain the infrastructure. So that's why these are two very separate markets, and we believe that will continue.
It's interesting. The whole DevSecOps acronym, or SecDevOps, if you will, I feel there's less security and it's more DevOps that we experience out there today, right? Would you?
Yeah,
Would you
you bring up a really wise point, and it's something that we as an industry have to evangelize, right? Because like you said,
Agreed.
culturally. Now, I think one of the things that we're working on at BlueFlag, and whenever we go into a meeting with a prospect or a partner, or hell, even unfortunately for my wife, I'm sure I talk about it at dinner sometimes. I live and breathe this stuff. But, our first and foremost objective is to define the problem. And we find that if we can first and foremost define the rubric of success, people really start to open their eyes. And we at BlueFlag have defined it into 4 key categories. So listeners, here, if there's only one thing your listeners walk away with today, I hope it's this. It's the 4 parts of securing the SDLC and defining the problem. It's identity governance, which is what we've been talking about a lot, right? Making sure that people have the permissions and entitlements needed to do their day-to-day job, no more. Then secondly, it's CI/CD governance, which is about posturing and making sure that with every commit, the integration and deployment settings are bespoke to that context, to that language, to that developer, right? Thirdly is code governance. And this is where we're talking about, like we said, package scanning, but also identification of who brought it in, the SAST, IAC Terraform vulnerabilities, secret leakage, etc. Right? Any vulnerabilities that are going to be found in the code. And then lastly, something we actually haven't talked about yet is compliance, right? And this is a really important thing, especially if you're in a regulated industry, like whether it's, SOC 2, CIS, benchmark, OWASP, PCI, ISO, maintaining compliance, compliant infrastructure, and not so just maintaining it, but automatically and continuously detecting breaches and then automating the remediation of that breach. So if you have a control that has failed, we initiate automatically with our business logic the remediation pathway, whether it's a Jira ticket, a Slack, a Slack channel initiation, whatever. So those are the 4 components. And so if we say that to our customers, you got to secure identity and access, you got to secure CI/CD, code, and your compliance standard. That's when people start saying like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? I can, this is achievable. We can do this as a DevOps culture.
This has been a great conversation. So I have one last question for you before you wrap up. Who owns this at the end of the day, right? Because of the 4 pieces you kind of mentioned, there's an overlap between identity. So I could see this as an extension to an IAM program. Because of the governance aspects of this, I can also see this living within the governance and compliance teams. But I also see this living within the infrastructure and the VP of infrastructure, and as well as the security team. So do you have a sense on who ultimately owns this, and then who handles all the day-to-day operations to administer this?
Yeah, that's a really great perspective. Okay, so I believe, so look, short answer and get to the point, it's going to be the CISO, right? At the end of the day, the cybersecurity risk to the SDLC is what is driving the demand for these products and the solution. And I think at the current moment in time, The CISO will be the owner, but that being said, I want to caveat with a couple things. One, the table of SDLC stakeholders is really wide, right? And that will include absolutely VPs of engineering, VPs of product who actually have designed the product and therefore have a very important say in how it's being built, CTOs, hell, even CFOs, right? People who actually have the responsibility of managing risk for the organization. But ultimately, let's be real clear, the CEO of an organization, if cybersecurity isn't a daily battery of thoughts and research on your mind as a CEO in today's digital age, I highly encourage that to be a daily practice, is to just read up on what's going on in the cybersecurity world, regardless of industry. But yes, I do believe at this exact moment in time, and particularly in the software development industries, right, where we're primarily, and the early adopters of these products are software companies, basically companies who their core competency, their core raison d'etre is to build and deploy software. The CISO is very concerned and is paying attention closely. But let's extrapolate to, say, an airline, a food and beverage company, companies where software is not the core competency, where applications are being built for, say, maybe internal applications for, internal tools. Maybe you have a consumer grade application for, informing your customers about, XYZ features. So in those cultures where software is not like the primary reason for the business's existence, cultures shift, right? And it may not they may not actually have a functioning CISO in many of these companies. In that case, it would absolutely fall to a CTO, and whoever is owning the technology, what it does and does not do. And so, that's kind of how I would divide it. So the closer the business is to software being its core competency, we find that CISOs are kind of leading the edge. But as you migrate away from that, then it falls more under a generic CTO title. Is that helpful?
No, it absolutely is. Thank you for this. This was very informative. If you want to learn more, Rajiv Srinivasan at BlueFlag Security. Emails will be at the end of this podcast. But also, please reach out to us here at Major Key Technologies, where we are working very closely to address the problem of SDLC governance in the industry today. Rajiv, I want to thank you for your time.
Right on, Nabil. It's always fun meeting you and hanging out with you. I really appreciate it.